I cannot hear you. So you'll need to get a hold of Evan or speak very loudly, and we'll stop and we'll hear your question. So just know that I cannot hear you, but Evan can, and those in the near vicinity can. We want to answer your questions from home. So just let us know. Evan's going to raise his hand if he hears a question, and we'll stop and hear it, okay? As a way of review, as I said, tonight we're going to be talking about the cosmological argument. And no, I didn't go out of my way to find a really long, complicated sounding word, but really not just the cosmological argument, but we're going to be having a really close look at theism this evening. This is our fourth lecture. Next week, we're going to take a week off from this, but not a week off from church, and then we'll have 3 other lectures to follow. What I want to do is make sure that we have a good understanding of what we've talked about thus far and why we've talked about it thus far and where we're headed. So we started the very first week identifying what the problem of evil is. Remember, we've said, if God is real, this is what the problem of evil posits. If God is real, there would be no evil in our world. Evil exists, therefore God does not. It's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? There's a lot of things that we could discuss. And we've looked at, how do we answer this problem? Well, we have to go back to the beginning, and we have to look at what evil is. And that's exactly what we did. We looked at natural evil, which is a type of evil that it's natural evil is an event which causes serious physical or mental injury to a sentient creature, resulting in severe pain or death, but is not caused directly by a moral agent. So that's one type of sin. We also addressed another type of sin, moral evil, and this is evil produced by me and you, by free moral agents. We talked about that God created a perfect creation. He created perfect human beings, and by doing that, he had to give us a perfect gift called free will. And free will gives us the ability to choose right from wrong. Now, it doesn't supersede or control the will of God, but it works within the umbrella of the sovereignty of God. We are moral in the fact that we know we've been given and have written on our hearts the moral law of God, which tells us what is wrong and what is right. Dwayne and I were talking earlier this afternoon. The fact that we have laws that were made by not necessarily Christian people, but laws that reflect morality that say that you cannot murder someone, regardless of their Christian belief, comes from the innate ability, the moral code written upon our hearts that we know that murder is wrong. And that leads us to the next topic, which is absolute truth. We know that something is wrong absolutely, because this is what God has hardwired us to understand. Why do we look at absolute truth? Because absolute truth, understanding that there are absolutes and there are absolute truths, brings meaning and reality to the evils that we've looked at. You see, if there's no absolute truth, and spoiler alert, no absolute truth giver, then the problem of evil isn't a problem of all. And evil isn't a problem at all. It is just a natural outflowing of the evolutionary mechanism. But evil, there is a problem with evil. And we are attempting, as we build this wall, to figure out how to answer this question. This question of the problem of evil cannot be answered without an understanding of what evil is, without an understanding of absolute truth. And tonight, we're going to add another layer that we understand theism, the idea of theism, okay? So, any questions about thus far what we've talked about? You see the systematic nature upon which we're laying, by which we're laying this. We have to know what evil is. We also have to know that there's an absolute truth that tells us that evil is wrong and not good. But we have to go a step further. What we're doing is we're saying, yes, there is a problem of evil, but there's an answer for it. And in order to get to the answer, which is God, we have to build this case that we're doing. And tonight, I want to begin with starting with what is theism? Does anybody know? Can anybody define theism? Mhm. Yeah. So basically, he believed in a God of his own making, right, in his own image. Okay. Theism, I'm going to give you a couple of definitions, and some of the slides tonight will be on your sheet and some of them will not. And that's because there's only so much room on a sheet and we didn't want to go back in front. Theism holds to the existence of what we might call a generic God, a higher being, one without the sort of theological details that distinguish between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Okay. I want you to understand that theism in and of itself does believe there's a God, but that doesn't mean it believes in the God of the Bible. Okay. So we're going to lay this foundation of theism, and then we're going to connect it to Christian theism. Okay. That's where we're headed. Theism is the worldview that an infinite personal God created the universe and miraculously intervenes in it from time to time. God is both transcendent over the universe and immanent in it. He is both outside of time and space, and he is both intimately involved with us in this world. Do you remember we defined what deism is? Deism, or deism, however you want to pronounce it, is the idea that there is a higher being, but he doesn't interact with us at all. It's impossible to connect deism with who God and what God is and how he's described in the scriptures. Theism takes us a step closer and says, no, there is a higher being, there is a God, and he also interacts with us through miracles and miraculous means. Now, there are some core theistic beliefs that I want us to look at just for a moment to kind of better get our minds around what we're talking about. And they're all up on the screen for you. They're on your page, and I'm going to hopefully give a little bit more emphasis on each statement. The first core theistic belief is that God exists beyond and in the world. This is what we just said, that theism holds to both transcendence and immanence of God, that he both transcends time and space and matter, and he also interacts within time, space, and matter. Secondly, the core theistic belief is the world was created ex nihilo. Okay, I may not be not pronouncing that perfectly, but that's how my professor says it. That word, those words mean out of nothing. So the world was created out of nothing. This is a theistic view. The world is not eternal. What we see around us, what we can touch, hear, and see is not eternal. It came into existence by God's decree. Its existence is totally continent and dependent upon God. It didn't just happen on its own. Nothing can come from nothing. Okay, it has to come from something. Right? We're everybody tracking with me? Thirdly, and again, this third core theistic belief, we're going to have a whole night on it in a couple of weeks. Theists believe miracles are possible. Miracles are possible. Although God operates his universe in a regular and orderly way by the laws of nature which he created, nevertheless, God does transcend those laws and can break those laws if he so chooses. He can break the laws of nature because he's the one who created nature. For example, he can resurrect himself. He can turn water into wine. He can walk on the top of the water, right? We cannot. God is the miracle maker. In fact, I had an entire 15-week class where we only studied miracles, proving them, providing biblical evidence, hearing the evidence for and against. It's really fascinating. I would have never thought that it could have taken up so much time, but it was really eye-opening. But that's a core theistic belief. Another one is people are made in the image of God, or in God's image. Theism believes in the creation of humankind in God's image. This means man has both freedom and dignity that ought to be treated with utmost respect. Now, see, we've already touched on that theme, that God made us in his image, that he made us in a special and particular way. We've talked about that as we've gone through the Westminster Confessional. And this is a core belief. Why would this be an important belief? Because God didn't just make us and set us in motion. You see, deists can both believe in God and also believe in the evolutionary process, because they can say that God created the beginnings and he let things go, and we're a random product of what God started with, and he didn't have anything in control of the way life has turned out. Theism says, no, we were made specific and particularly, and that's an important distinction. Theists also hold to there is a moral law. Since the theist God is a moral being, and since humankind is created in God's image, a moral corollary of theism is that the ultimate duty of people is to obey moral law. Theists believe that God is moral, that he has written morality upon our hearts, that he has given us morality as a gift, and then expects us to follow that moral law. Also, a core theistic belief is rewards and punishment await. Each individual life, like all of history, is pointed toward an end or a goal. Human moral actions will be rewarded or punished. You know what I find interesting, and what I want to point out to you, is that all of these theistic core beliefs sound biblical in a sort, don't they? But we're not quite there. Let me just give you one example, and we're going to circle back to this. If I say that, if I talk about moral law, but I don't talk about the idea of sin, if I don't talk of the idea of being forgiven of sin, that breaking God's law is not just breaking morality, but breaking his holy law. And I know this because scripture teaches me this. It also teaches me how to be restored to God through Christ. If that's not part of it, then we're not quite all the way there that we need to be with just a simple theistic viewpoint. Okay. And that leads me to the next thing that we're going to be talking about. Is I want to show you briefly some arguments that have been developed by theists to prove that there is a God. The first one I want to talk about, and I got pages and pages of descriptions about these things. I'm not going to download that to you because we want to get to the main one tonight that I want to talk about, which is the cosmological argument. But the first one is the moral argument for God. So what this argument is saying that because we can see that every culture, every person in the world, whether they follow this law or not, we know that there are certain things that are morally right and morally wrong. Okay, it's not a hard and fast description. It's kind of a general description. And through that morality, through seeing that, again, I was talking to Dwayne today, and somebody might say, well, your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. Well, my response is always, okay, well, then it's okay for me to murder you. No. It's not okay for you to murder me. Sure it is. No, that's wrong. No, it's not wrong to me. It's only wrong to you. You know, too bad for you. It's right for me because I want to take your stuff. No, that's wrong. You're right, it is wrong because they're absolutes. and there's absolute morality. There's absolute truth. We know this in our core because God has made us this way, right? So the moral argument for God sees that God is proved, the existence of God is proved through our moral propensity, our moral code, right? That's a strong argument. There are a lot of people who have argued for that, a lot of people who have pushed back on that, but it's a good start, as it were. Okay, I'm going to bring up this next slide because hopefully you can see that fairly well. This is from, again, Cold Case Christianity, and you'll see some of the words that I'm going to use are up there. Some of them have a different definition, but you also have the arguments on your page in front of you. The next one we want to look at is embrace yourself. It's a big word. You'll hardly ever use this in normal conversation, but it's the ontological argument. The ontological argument. Simply put, I can argue for God's existence this way. If you say that there is a higher being, then you must believe about that higher being that he has certain attributes that are greater than everything else, that he has all knowledge, that he has all power, that he's ever present, that he's truthful, that he doesn't lie, and on and on and on and on and on and on and on. But if those things are true, what other thing must be true? Anybody want to make a stab at that? Malcolm. He must exist. That's a fantastic answer. That's the answer I'm looking for. If God is all those things, one thing he must be is real, right? So someone might say, well, I'm gonna prove God through the cosmological argument or the moral argument for God. And they're going to say, I can promise you that he is real, because otherwise, if he weren't in control, if he wasn't absolute, then he wouldn't be real. But because we can see the effects of his strength and power and interaction with the world, then he must be real. It's like this. If I described a person as very tall, blonde, blue-eyed, wearing a red jumper, is he real? Are those things true? Well, yes, only if he's real. If he's not real, then none of those things are true. It's just, fabric of my imagination, right? So with the ontological argument, God cannot be all those things that we say that he is unless he be, unless he is, okay? Another argument, and see, that gets us on the right track, but not quite there. There's also the idea of the design argument. The design argument is derived from the Greek word telos. You can see up there the teleological argument, meaning end or purpose. And it's based on an idea that there is a hierarchy of designs from simple to complex, and that there must be a master designer behind all of them. For example, let's say we're on a hike, in the woods, okay? And we find a pocket watch in the woods randomly. Would we say that pocket watch just appeared out of nothing? No, we wouldn't say that. We would say, look at this pocket watch, look at the design, look at the gold casing, look at them. If we opened it up, we could see the mechanism contained within. Someone meticulously put this all together, closed it up, wound it up, and let it go. And now it tells us the time. Think about all the stuff that has to go into proper timekeeping. We take it for granted now. We have digital watches that move forward or jump back without us even thinking about it. We have clocks that all we have to do is wind it a little bit, adjust it a little bit. But what if we said, go out and make your own clock? Unless you were a master craftsman, you wouldn't be able to do that. the teleological argument, the design argument is that when you look at human beings, the intricacies of who they are, how the muscles work together, the bones work together, it points to a master craftsman who we would say that is God, right? We still don't quite get to the God of the Bible, but we're getting close. Okay, we're close. Another argument is an argument from providence. Wayne Grudem, a systematic theologian, says that we may define God's providence as follows. God is continually involved in all created things in such a way that he, one, keeps them existing and maintaining the properties with which he created them, and two, cooperates with created things in every action, directing their distinctive properties to cause them to act as they do, and three, directs them to fulfill his purposes. You know, we've talked about the difference in the miraculous and providence, that God uses the everyday. He works within the natural law and providence to carry out his perfect sovereign will. And we can see in this argument that to the argument of providence, that God is working all things together. Now, this argument takes a little bit more of a leap of faith than the others, but it's still, all of these theistic arguments are still falling a bit short of the Bible, the God of the Bible. Okay, we're about to transition and talk a bit further about the cosmological argument. That's kind of the focus of tonight. But before we do that, do we have any questions thus far, or additions or comments, David? Yeah. We know where they get them from. Well, where do theists get the core beliefs? It comes from this. See if I can explain this and make it make sense. Theists are basically describing the God of the Bible without describing the God of the Bible. They're borrowing from what we know about God from Scripture, but they're subcategorizing it. Now, I'll be honest with you. There are not a lot of theists who aren't Christian theists, or who aren't Islamic theists, or Jewish theists, okay, where they take their understanding of their scriptures to guide their thought about this God that we're describing. So the theists that where you look at these beliefs are more in line with Christianity, but they kind of subcategorize themselves and say, well, you can describe theism without describing the God of the Bible. And it's more of a show that there's a progression from a generic God to the God of the Bible. And the reason that I bring this out is you might be in a conversation with somebody that says, I believe in a higher power. And you might have in your memory banks, you might have in your phone, you might say, well, do you believe that God, that this higher being exists outside of time and space and interacts with us? Yeah, I believe that. Do you believe that the world wasn't created out of nothing, that God created it? Yeah, I believe that. But I don't know if I believe about the Bible. Oh, okay. Well, do you believe that miracles happen? Yeah, I really believe miracles happen. I'm totally down with that, right? Okay. And you walk them through that and you say, everything that you're believing has this great connection to the God of the Bible. Let me show you the God of the Bible, and then you show them that, because what you want to do ultimately is prove that the God that they say they believe in, the God of the Bible, fits all of that and provides salvation, provides restoration. Does that make sense? Yeah. In philosophical discussions, in apologetic debates, if you just stood up and said, Christian theism is the way to go, somebody would say, But people do believe in that God. They just don't believe the God of the Bible. They believe all these similarities, but they're not sure that it's the God of the Bible, that he's more than just what's on the page. And so they'll have that subcategory of theism instead of Christian theism. You can study theism, and then you could study Christian theism, and there's volumes that abound. That's a good question, David. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll press on. So I have the star here because that's where we're going. We're going to look at the cosmological argument. I want to share with you a little bit from the book I was telling you about. J. Warner Wallace says this. He says, the vast majority of scientists continue to acknowledge that the universe came into being from nothing at some point in the far distant past. Many have articulated this as the Big Bang Theory. Well, I don't know if you've read lately, but the Big Bang Theory is under a little bit of attack from the very scientists who've held so closely to it. The Big Bang Theory is commonly referred to as the standard model of cosmology. But is the universe, when did the universe begin to exist, and what began the universe? What caused that first domino or block to fall into the long sequence of cause and effect dominoes? That's the question. If we say, well, the universe had a beginning. For example, if you're a father, you have a child, and you have a father, and he has a father, and he has a father, and he has a father. So there's not an infinity of regression going backwards. There has to be some place where the first father existed. But how did he come to exist? There must have been something that brought him to existence. This is the question that people ask. Scientists understand the absurdity of an endless sequence of dominoes spanning back and back and back into the infinite eternity. All these scientists are looking for an uncaused first cause that is capable of starting the domino run all by itself. The uncaused first cause must exist outside of space, time, and matter, as nothing has ever been observed to cause itself to exist, right? What could be uncaused and powerful enough to cause the universe? Well, you and I, as Christian theists, we know it was God, but the question still remains. If the caused universe once wasn't, why is it here at all? There was a man very famous, Gottfried Leibniz, who famously wrote, "Why is there something rather than nothing?" Isn't that a good question? Why is there something rather than nothing? We typically think of God as an eternal, all-powerful being who exists outside of space, time, and matter. The evidence for the finite universe, a universe that has a beginning, points circumstantially to the existence of such a God. So if something comes to existence, something else has to cause it to exist, because nothing comes from nothing. Something that exists has come from something else, if it's come to exist. If an eternal, all-powerful being exists, then Leibniz's famous question has an answer. A being of this natural might, of this nature, might freely choose to create a universe that demonstrated his power and serve as a place where his cherished creatures could begin to understand his nature. The causal evidence of the universe is a significant piece of circumstantial evidence for the existence of God. This truly is the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument, which gets its name from the Greek word cosmos, world or universe, and it comes from the idea that since the universe exists, it must have been caused by something beyond itself. If you were to walk into your kitchen and find the cabinet door open and some things knocked over and spilling out, you wouldn't think to yourself, oh, that just happened. You would think, who did this? In my house, all the time, it's who spilled something, you know, who didn't put away their rubbish. We never think, wow, how did that just appear? Right? That's God has given us the sense that we don't ask that question. We ask, who did it? People, I mean, the most cherished books out there and shows are the whodunits, you know. We ask the question, why is this the way that it is? For this reason, as we've been talking, the argument is sometimes called the argument from first cause. And it relies upon a philosophical principle that every effect has a cause. Author Brian Morley says a cosmological argument assumes that something exists and argues to the existence of a first cause of sufficient reason for the cosmos. And isn't that what scientists are trying to answer? Where did all this come from? While many might deny that it's God, we know that it is God and that he created everything from nothing. Another way to define the cosmological argument is it offers reasons to believe that the cosmos depends on something outside of itself. One of the bases for the idea that all creation is dependent on something outside itself is a denial of infinite regression. That's what I was talking about. When you see, if you were to walk into a room and dominoes were trailing back that way, but they were being knocked down into the room, you wouldn't assume that those dominoes go on for an infinity. I mean, you wouldn't follow it out the door and then down the street and into the city and follow it. You wouldn't assume that it goes forever. You would immediately know that something happened to cause that. Somebody knocked the first domino over. And you might go around the room and say, there's so-and-so who's set it up and knocked it over. The cosmos existing is dependent on something outside of itself. And it doesn't go back for an infinity. There is something that started everything. Okay? Simply put, infinite regress means that the sequence of reasoning never comes to an end. There are some scientists who say, no, it just goes on and on and on and we'll never figure it out. There's no beginning and no end to reason. Some people have taken the cosmological argument to be this. Now, I'm going to tell you, spoiler alert, there's a glaring problem with this very first attempt at the cosmological argument, and I want to talk about that in a moment. Number one, everything exists must have a cause. The universe exists and so must have a cause. Therefore, the universe is caused by a first cause, which is God. Now, as you're thinking about the problems with this set, apologetic arguments or philosophical arguments are usually done this way. They'll have a couple of statements and a recap statement that prove their first two statements are true. I'll show you some more in just a minute. I'll tell you that the problem with this first attempt at the cosmological argument is found in number one. Ian, why is it wrong? Why? That's not where I was going for, but we'll answer that. There you go. That's where we're going. So the problem with this is that if this is true, then God who exists, if we say God exists, then he's not infinite. He has a beginning. He's finite. And we know that's not true about God. God is not finite, which means he doesn't have a beginning. He's infinite, which means no beginning and no end. Yes, Ian. Yeah, and we're going to get there. A guy named No, you're right on track, gold star, because we'll see in a minute that people have taken this and they've adjusted it to make it better. Dwayne.
Everything exists, everything in time exists. Time is creation.
Mm.
And everything exists in time. Obviously, at the start.
Mm-hmm.
Because time is the start.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has an end. God doesn't have time.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, God can exist on his own without
Right.
This is why causation exists
Mm-hmm.
in time.
Yeah.
Because he's the start of it,
Mm-hmm.
and he's outside of it. Cause and effect.
Right.
He's the ultimate cause.
Exactly. Exactly.
The dominoes down.
Yes, God is the answer for what or who created this, who created the universe. God is the answer. However, just because we who are Christians believe that doesn't make it true in and of itself. It is true, but for a lost world or an atheist, they would say, well, yeah, you just believe that, right? So that's why in the weeks to come, when we're going to talk about miracles, is we're going to give evidence and proof that the God of Christian theism is real, and he's real because miracles do happen, have happened, and the greatest one was the resurrection, right? Again, if God is created, he can't be God, and we're still left answering the question, right? If he's created, well, then who created him, right? All right, good questions. And I'm very proud that we nailed what was wrong with that. Again, just to recap, because God is infinite with no beginning and no end, he could not have a beginning. Many variations or versions of this argument exist. If you go back to the original arguments that people pose, other philosophers and apologists will take it and fiddle with it and ask questions of it and hopefully come out with something better, posit something better. One version of the cosmological argument is based on a gentleman we talked about earlier, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and he asks, why do things exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? And he's really the one that came up with this very first cosmological argument. But a man named William Lane Craig, has anybody heard of William Lane Craig? I want you to be very careful if you do study William Lane Craig. He's a brilliant apologist, but he wouldn't, and as brilliant as he is, and as great of defenses that he's made for the Bible, he's a little bit shaky on creation. He's a little bit shaky on whether Adam was a real person or a composite person. So I just want to give that disclaimer. If you ever listen to him, he's a very brilliant man. I've read some of his stuff, and it made my head really, really hurt. He's a guy that writes and you have to read it 4 or 5 times and you still don't get it. So I'm just telling you, but he did come up with another easier way for us to follow the argument. Okay. Want to run through these for just a moment. And then he's actually even made it even easier than this in just a moment. Here's again those posits. Okay. He says, anything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. So there's a reason for existence. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, the explanation is God. Now he's assuming God here, and as he's positing these things. Number 2, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, the explanation is God. Third, the universe exists. So therefore, the universe has an explanation of its existence, and the explanation of the existence of the universe is God. There's a reason for everything, and the reason is God. He could have just said it that way, but smart people don't seem to simplify things even when they're trying to simplify. But most people really track well with number 2. If the universe has an explanation of existence, that explanation is God. He's saying that, and the way that a lot of philosophers and apologists in their arguments will say, they'll always put like an if or a might or a perhaps to safeguard their backside from an argument. So he says, if the universe has an explanation, he's still leaving that open for debate. But if it does, the explanation has to be God. All right. Every human being has a strong feeling that the universe exists contingently and not necessarily. Morley, from a guy that we were looking at earlier, he says that this premise too that we're looking at up here is very reasonable. Since the universe includes all physical reality, the cause of the universe must be physical. What he means is he says that the cause can't be numbers, right? The cause has to be something physical, like a physical being, God, calling into existence the universe. Now, so this is William Lane Craig's attempt to simplify it and make it easier, but he's very famous for another simplification of this, which he calls the Kalam or Kalam argument, and it's K-A-L, A with the line over it, M. Okay, and he wrote his dissertation on this argument. Actually, the idea of Kalam was a centerpiece of the intellectual movement in medieval Islamic theology. Remember how we said that there are Islamic theists and there's Jewish theists and there's Christian theists. So you always have to be careful if you're ever reading about theism, where it's coming from. Okay. But Craig took those ideas and he made them Christian with these three posits. And Ian, you were spot on with your adjustments to the earlier. And he says this. So here's a very, very strong cosmological argument that really people are wrestling with still today. William Lane Craig is still alive. He's still writing, but he says, here's the cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And who is that cause? God. Right? You all with me? Yes, no?
No.
Yeah, they still might say this. So this is still just a theistic argument. Thank you, Dwayne. Dwayne is saying that some people still might say, well, this isn't the God of the Bible. This is just God, right? David. People would say that it began to exist because it exists, that there's not an infinite regression, that we don't go back, that the world we're living in now, because it ages and it's growing and it's changing, signifies that it has a beginning, that the existence says, or the existence shouts that it has a beginning. Yes, Ian. Yeah, you've got a slight argument for God if you can prove that what we're living in always existed. But then you have to have the answer, how did it always exist? Right? And a thing, so I don't want us to get into the woods too much, okay, or into the weeds too much. But a thing, can it be infinite? Can it be ever existing? You know, a tree, a bird, the ground, the earth, or must it have a beginning? Must it have a creator? For example, if you found that watch in the woods, would you naturally assume that it's always existed? Or would you, again, like we've said, be pointed to that because of the teleological argument that it has a master, it has a creator? And these are things that people debate with and they talk about. And we're not necessarily going to come to an answer for that, but it's just, it's healthy to think about it. David, your original question a second ago was, how do we know it began? Yeah. Okay. Again, I would circle back to the idea that if you look at number one, whatever begins to exist. So he's making the assumption. You could change this and look at it from the argument of, well, how do you know it existed? But he's coming up from the idea that it began to exist. And the reason he's saying this is because he wants to pivot, because William Lane Craig is a professed Christian. What he's wanting to do with this is to pivot and say it began from God, and God is the one that is infinite and everlasting, and God is actually the God of the Bible, right? That's the progression. Okay. I will say this, that premise one is more or less accepted, but premise two, as we have been discussing, is the one that is discussed and challenged more. So you guys are right on point. I mean, gold star. Is that a thing? Do the teachers give out gold stars, David? I don't know. The other thing is that you have to go back to that idea of ex nihilo, that nothing comes from nothing, right? That what we see around us has to have come from something, because it's inside of time, space, matter. And we would differentiate that between where God exists. Okay. All right. I really am not trying to overload you in these weeks. I want to help you and to help you think. And I want to finish on, and I've alluded to some of these things. We've talked about these arguments for theism. We've talked about the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument basically says that we can look out into the earth, into the cosmos, and see that something greater than ourselves sprang this into existence. Okay. But it doesn't quite get us all the way to the God of the Bible. It's a starting point. For those of you who have been in my evangelism class, in the gospel, we're talking about four things: God, man, Christ, and response. And I've said many, many times, when we're talking to people, we need to find out what they think about God. Do they believe that there is some kind of supernatural being, all-powerful being? Do they kind of believe that the God of the Bible is true? Or do they say, nope, no God? Understanding what people believe about God, we can begin to use some of these theistic arguments to help them bridge the gap and get them to thinking about, if you believe that a God exists, if you believe that he's all-powerful, he's involved in the world, then it's an easier stepping stone in that situation to get them to see the God of the Bible is the true God who acts in this fashion, right? But theism doesn't quite get us to Christian theism. And there's some issues with theism, as I've kind of laid out. Number one, while theism lays down important arguments, while the cosmological argument makes a strong argument for the existence of a God, it does not get one completely to the existence of the God. So there's a big difference between a God and the God of the Bible. One must push further to make the connection that the God we are describing cosmologically and theistically is the God of the Bible. Okay, so when we look at all of these arguments, they don't quite get us to the God of the Bible, but they get us close. And we then make the connection for people that there is a God, and it's not a God, it's the God. Without the Bible, theism is left to make claims about God without any foundational truths to which allow us to identify the one true God. Okay. And then lastly, theistic arguments are a bit like general revelation. What is general revelation? We can go and we can see the mountains and the trees and the birds, and we have this understanding, this feeling that there's something greater than ourselves. But we know that general revelation cannot save us, right? Apart from specific revelation, Christ, the Word of God, God's voice himself, we cannot know how to come fully to saving faith in Christ. And so theistic arguments are a bit like general revelation. All the theistic arguments have at least some validity. However, without a connection to the specific revelation of Christ in the Bible, theism is left a bit flat. But without theism being Christian, it falls short of the goal. Sorry, I just had a moment where I thought, is it still only 7 o'clock? It's 7:24. The clock back there is wrong. Yeah. Whew. I was waiting for a revolt, in another 5 minutes or so. But okay, let me bring it back. Let me bring it back. So in the introduction, we talked about building this wall. We're looking at the problem of evil, right? If God exists, there wouldn't be any evil. But evil does exist. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. And here's why. We understand that natural evil is bad. We understand moral evil is bad. Why do we understand that? Because we know that there are absolutes. There is absolute truth. Now, if we say there are absolute truths, we have to be prepared to defend and describe who gave us those absolute truths. And what does theism do? What does an argument like cosmological argument do? It gets us closer to an understanding of the God of the Bible. But you can't stop there. When we come in 2 weeks and we look at miracles and the miracle of the resurrection, what we're going to say is, we're going to connect all that we said and say, now, let me prove to you that the God of the Bible is the God. How can we prove that? Theism says that there is a God. He interacts with his people. The God of the Bible, who describes miracles, who from the foundations of the world interacts with his people, is the real God. Why? Why can I say that? Well, let me prove to you through the miracle of the resurrection. Let me prove to you that it did happen. And because it happened, then everything else in the scriptures, everything else that God has to say is true and trustworthy, right? You see that progression? That's where we're going. That's why we're kind of going through the weeds a little bit. That's why we're really stretching our brains a little bit, because we need to understand the progression. And there is a gospel presentation application to this, where we get people from an angry point and a point where they don't want to be with God to maybe a place that's closer to the God of the Bible. And then maybe someone else can take them further on through their testimony and their connection with them and the gospel. I hope that that's what we're seeing is the reason why we're going through all this. And listen, I want us to dialogue. If you have further questions, or if I've said something which is very easy for me to do that I didn't say correctly or didn't make sense, let's talk about it. Because I don't want you to ever sit and think, oh, I don't understand that. He doesn't have time. I'm not going to bother him. Please bother me. I don't want you to not understand. If you don't get something, let's talk about it. Okay? Any questions about what we've talked about this evening? Can I clarify anything? Ian? I think you're right. And there have been people, I think that book is one, that have talked about using that analogy of the watch to prove that God is real. Yeah, I'm sure that he has. I've had to read a lot of Dawkins, and I've had to read a lot of responses. So there's lots of discussion out there over lots of different things. What I'm hoping to give you in those little stories about the watch is some nugget to hold on to that'll help you in a conversation down the road. Any other questions, comments? Thank you so much for your attention. We're going to pray. We got coffees and teas and some snacks in the lounge. So I'll be around for a while. If you have any questions, just let me know. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear God, we thank you for life and for your love and for liberty. And we ask tonight that you would help us to continue to think about what we studied tonight. And then be able to use it beneficially as we interact with the world. God, we want the people closest to us in our neighborhoods and our friends to come to know the God of the Bible. But we want them to see that you created us and you're intimately involved in our lives. And that though evil happens and suffering happens, it doesn't happen without a reason and a purpose. That you are not cruel, that you are not heartless, but you are loving and caring, and everything that happens is within your control. God, may we be better ready to give an answer when people ask tough questions about life and why things are the way they are. That's the goal of these talks, is that we will be better servants of you, better in humility, better in knowledge from the word, better givers of grace and mercy. Lord, we want people to know you. We want to make you known. Lord, help us in this endeavor. Help us to learn and to glean all the things that you would have us to, so that we can be better at communicating who you are to a lost and dying world. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.